Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. We're happy that you could join us today for the first part in our four-part webinar series, all about backyard natural resources. So in this webinar, we'll be learning about soil health, water conservation strategies, our grasslands, and backyard biodiversity, including insects and plants. So these sessions will be recorded and available on YouTube on our SDSU Extension site. And today, if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them into the chat. And if you have any other comments or anything like that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amanda Bachman, our urban entomologist, who will be introducing our first speaker today.
Awesome. Thank you, Robin. And Robin is our horticulture field specialist based in Sioux Falls and Brookings. So thank you to everyone who's joining us live. And yes, if you've got questions, throw them in the Q&A widget. And if you're having any difficulties or need help from the tech and somebody will be in touch with you to help you out. And you can keep an eye on the chat for some of the links to resources and surveys at the end that we'll be posting. So yeah, Anthony Bly is our soils field specialist with SDSU Extension, getting his video up there, awesome. He works with crop producers and agronomists to solve soil issues through educational activities and developed from unbiased soil and crop research. Anthony's knowledge areas include soil fertility, testing, and health factors related to resource management and crop productivity. So thank you, Anthony, for joining us on one of our sort of lunch and learn webinar series. So I'll
You're
just
welcome.
turn everything over to you. You can go ahead and share screen and the floor is yours.
There we go. Okay, well, thank you a lot. I'm on this beautiful May spring day. Wow, we can't get many better than this, really. It's really why we live here, I think. So anyway, yeah, really, you can't do this in the garden. A lot of my history or a lot of my experience has been with agronomy and field crops and I've worked with some gardening folks and spoke at some gardening events and so I've tried to relate soil health to gardens and flowers and things like that and I totally believe we can do it in all cases. So first I'd like to I'll point out a couple books, three books here, I guess, that I think you should probably consider reading if soil health is something you're interested in. The one on the left is where I would start. The Soil Owner's Manual by John Sticka. He's from North Dakota. And it's very basic reading, good reading, easy reading, but really covers a lot of important things. And then Dr. David Montgomery wrote The Hidden Half of Nature. He's got several other books as well that I would recommend, but very interesting and linking the biosphere, if you will, and how all of that functions together and how it should be functioning. And the importance that we start thinking about that and trying to move back towards that. And then on the right is a farmer's experience moving down the regenerative agricultural road. And so that's kind of a nice read too. So there's many other books. I can only get three on my picture frame there. So anyway, those are good places to start. So let's just move back in time a little bit. And a lot of folks would say this is totally irrelevant to today, but just some nasty pictures out of the 30s. It's hard to believe what it would have been like to live during that time. My grandparents were just newly married and starting a family. And so there was a lot of struggles. They didn't live in the worst part, of course, of the Dust Bowl, but certainly were affected by that and the Great Depression. Just some more shots out of the 30s up in the upper left. That is Gregory, South Dakota there when a dust storm was coming in. Very drastic period of time. And we don't know when these climate extremes are going to occur. And what happened in the 30s is that a number of years of drought occurred. And so the soil was unable to produce vegetation to protect it. That coupled with the farming practices that they were using at the time and the breaking of the prairie just set us up for a huge disaster. And so the point is we don't know when these series of climate events will happen. And so we need to have our soil in a state of good soil health to combat that, to be resilient towards that. In 2014, this is a dust front similar to the 30s, but now we're up in an airplane taking a picture of that. And it's also moving a weather front with it. Okay, you can see there above the dust, there are some clouds coming in with it. And that was picked up on radar. And to some extent, just on Sunday afternoon, I witnessed this in a localized fashion, just in my own neighborhood. When these small thunderstorms were coming through, ahead of them were gust fronts. And if the fields were tilled and bared, the soil was blowing terribly across that field. And I have a picture, but I just didn't get it in for today. So sorry about that. It brings it really relevant to May 12th of 2022. This the derecho that occurred certainly looked like the dirty 30s. And so it totally brings a relevance to today, to the current period of time. And this picture also brings back, hopefully, some recollection of that day and how it really affected everybody. It wasn't just affecting those that farm and grow crops. It affected everybody that day. And so there were car accidents. There were all kinds of things happening. Trees falling on cars. I know that was the wind, but here we have these intense storm events carrying a lot of soil. And so my statement is let's stop treating our soil like dirt. And as a soil scientist, dirt is a 4-letter word in the true sense, in that soil in place doing what it should be doing should never be called dirt. On the other hand, when the soil leaves the field and gets in the road ditches, or even causes deaths on the interstate in Illinois because soil is blowing, then it's dirt when it's out of place. And here we can see the soil that's on top of those snow drifts. And this is along I-29. I did stop and take that picture. I will admit that. I just was kind of like, golly, I got to have this picture. And what's really striking is I'm looking relatively northwest, and the predominant winds, over the winter are from the northwest. But something is changing. And most winters now, you can find dirt in the ditch on the east side of the interstate, and it's coming from the other direction, the northeast. And so we're having soil blowing from many different directions, which doesn't seem normal to me. It seems like something has been heightened, and I think our soil resiliency has been suffering the last many years, and so that's enabling that to happen. Of course, when the soil erodes by water, out of this neighboring field here, and you can see those corn plants are nearing waist high. We had a strong rainfall event, and that soil came out, and it's filling the ditch. In fact, you can see it's to the right side of the picture there. It's going onto the gravel, and in fact, it did go across the gravel further back. I just didn't get that in the frame, but our young people are really smart these days, and I speak to some high school students once in a while, and I've shown this picture, and I ask them, what does this mean? What does this really mean? And they all sit around, and this is a smaller school I spoke at. It had like 10 students in the science class or something. And one of the girls raised her hand and said, yeah, my dad's on the township board, and the township board, they were talking about cleaning out the ditches. And so where does that money come from? Comes from taxpayers. Yes, the person that owns this land that soil come from pays taxes, right? You could say those taxes are going to clean the ditch out when they probably should be going to maintain that road, that public access road. So it's all of our problem. It affects everyone in some way, and it's very important that we improve and hold our soil health in a good condition. Just one more picture here of of the nasty things that happen. Here's friends of mine. We're driving around looking at crops one day, and all the erosion after an event. And this is a silt plume here, right here where Peter is standing, and it's roughly a foot to a foot and a half higher in elevation than where this graduate student is standing down in the field. And so the water was slowing down here as it came to the road ditch, and the sediments were falling out. And so I ask in more public settings, is this the best soil or the worst soil in this field? And everyone says the best soil because it's come from the soil surface where all the nutrients and the carbon are at. And so it's very important that we do things, we use practices to stop this from happening. So let's switch gears a little bit here from all the pictures, and let's get into really why we need to do this. And I believe that we're damaging our ecosystem, our soil ecosystem, or the food web at an alarming rate. In the soil, there is a food web or a food chain similar to on top of the soil. Let's think about the savannas in Africa. I've never been there, but you read books or you see videos on that, and the food chain that occurs there, right? You have the grazers, and then you have the carnivores eating the grazers to keep it more simple, but it's more complex than that, of course. But in the soil, it's no different. We have we have one group feeding on another group, and then feeding on another group, and feeding on the organic matter. And each time there is a feeding, for lack of a better term, there is energy released and nutrients released. Okay, and so when the food web is functioning properly, it can supply the nutrients and the carbon that either the forest in this case would take, or the prairie used to require. I'm pretty sure that no one fertilized the prairie when it was growing, and it grew and grew and grew, and it produced the wonderful soils that we have that are high in organic matter. And so that process was self-sustaining, and that's really what we're looking for in regenerative ag and systems that have good soil health. And it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, you really have to work on it a lot. I just want to show you, I visited a commercial garden, I guess you would say, in Illinois. And on the left is how they used to do it, with very ugly erosion between those raised beds. And on the right is how they do it now. And it really looks a lot better, doesn't it? We have green cover crops there between those rows of annual strawberries, believe it or not. And so the soil's protected, it's covered. And so there's ways to do this on a large scale and on a small scale. So what is soil health? I like this definition, basically because it combines the physical, chemical, and biological properties, which are very important. We need to focus on all of those properties. And it says here that they impact the function and productivity of the soil, with several of these affecting the economics. And we think about sustainability, we think about that economic part as well. What this doesn't mention is the social part, which is also very important. So NRCS uses 17 indicators of soil health, and we used to call it soil quality, but we'll call it soil health. Here they are divided into those chemical, physical, and biological components. I'm not going to talk about every one of those. I could, but for the essence of time, it's just hard to do. But they all are somewhat interacting. For instance, we need good aggregate stability to let water in and air in, so that the respiration of the microbes can cycle the nutrients. And here we have nitrate, nitrogen. It's a good thing in the soil in a limited amount. When it gets to be a excessively high amounts is when it starts leaking into the groundwater or tile drains into surface waters, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of these are important. And usually when I visit a field and there's an issue or a problem, you can figure it out by thinking about these soil health components. Usually one or two or three of them are the greatest limiting factor to having really good soil health. So why is soil health important? Well, we know we grow plants. Those plants feed animals, and the plants and the animals sustain human activity and existence. Soil provides a firm foundation. Too much tillage, too much disturbance. We have weak soil. It compresses very easily and very strongly and compacts, and that's not good. Healthy soils conserve water and nutrients. They cycle nutrients from those inorganic forms to those organic forms, and vice versa as well. And filter and buffer chemical inputs, because a lot of times, farmers, if there's a pest outbreak or if there's a patch of weeds, we use chemicals to control them. And healthy soils that have a lot of biological activity, to have that soil food web functioning well, can buffer that very well. Most of these herbicides, insecticides are carbon based, and so it's those microbes that buffer them out and actually break them down. So it's very important for that. We can visually see the differences between soils with and without good soil health. The one on the left, obviously, lighter colored, big chunky, massive pieces of soil actually having no structure. A soil scientist would say this is structureless condition. So this soil on the left has been farmed what I would consider more conventionally, more traditionally, as we've moved on in history. My grandfather had a plow. I was taught how to plow on our farm. I'm not attacking that. It's part of our heritage, but today we have a lot more technology and a lot more know-how, and we can do things differently in a better way. So on the left, more conventional, a way to do things, somewhat of a crop rotation, alfalfa and corn, and a lot of tillage. And then on the right, basically, a no-till situation, not tilled for about 30 some years. In this picture, just a corn bean rotation, not a lot of diversity, but you can see the difference. It's alarming. And these two soil samples, or two tubs, were obtained only a very short distance away from each other, just across a gravel road, if you will. So very similar soil type, and the management is having a marked difference on the soil health. So we focus on the soil health principles mainly to help folks understand how to get there, what to do. Number one, or the first one on the list, is keeping the soil protected. We call that armor, keeping it covered. And as I mentioned, in the dirty 30s, we had a number of years where the soil was unable to grow plants to provide that protection. And so when that protection ran out and the soil dried out and the winds blew, we had a disaster. And so, we're trying to protect our natural resource, is a good way to say it. So we get the cover on the soil, or we maintain that cover on the soil by doing less tillage. And you hear tillage talked about a lot. And granted, 30 years ago, that's where the discussions were all about, the no-till versus the tilled. We hardly talked about crop rotation. We hardly talked about diversity and continuous living roots. But I'll tell you this, we know more today. As I mentioned, that technology just keeps advancing and advancing. And so we're learning as we go, and we need to just keep keep folks and farms caught up with that. And because it does work in all places around our state, there are farmers doing and gardeners doing these practices. So the plant diversity, the crop rotation, the cover crops are so important because they fill in gaps where other crops aren't growing, and that leads to the continuous living root. Without that continuous living root in the soil, keeping the soil biology functioning basically is the reason for that. At that root, the plant is harvesting sunlight and water and CO2 and releasing sugars that the microorganisms are feeding on because they need carbon, and they're bringing the nutrients to the plant root. And so I call that the greatest exchange. And without that happening, we don't exist on this planet. Okay. That's where sunlight energy meets us. And it's so important that living root be there as much as possible to keep that soil biology functioning. And then lastly, we have livestock integration. We think about the prairies where the buffalo roamed and the other deer and elk. Their role was to consume that plant material and convert it to more organic, friendly forms. And so that's what they did. And so livestock is important. You may say, I have a garden. What are you saying, Anthony? Get a goat out there, get some sheep or a cow or whatever. Well, you might not have access. I think applying soil amendments really fits here for you. That's where those amendments can come in, and the compost, maybe some manure, whatever that you have that you can put on your garden. I that's what you use in place of that last principle. So they can be used everywhere. I think for me, I like to focus on aggregate stability, the clumping of sand, silt, and clay and organic matter together into stronger, well, they're aggregates is what we call them, aggregation of those particles together. And we get there from the living roots. The living roots are really causing that to happen because of the organic glues such as glomalin that are released that help stick and bind those particles together. And so those are the homes for the microbes. Those are the homes and the inter aggregate spaces are where the air and oxygen exchange happens and the water infiltration happens. So it's very important to have soils that are well aggregated. And we see this happening a lot with all of our good soils that are showing great soil health. Just a picture of that glomalin there. It's a mycorrhizal fungi protein. Dr. Christine Nichols with ARS back in the early 90s was part of the effort or led that effort that just made that discovery. And so we know how important that is. And there's others as well. And I'm assuming science will make those discoveries, and we'll know what those are. Our earthworms have huge benefits. They really do a lot of tillage in the soil that we're not aware of. Their burrows open up channels for water and roots to follow, help air exchange, and then their casts are so important. They're a great organic source for nutrients and other enzymes and things in the soil because they're carrying the soil all throughout the soil profile, and they just have huge benefits for the soil. So how do we get more worms? Well, we have to stop tillage. There's some worms that can tolerate some tillage, but by and large, most are negatively impacted from tillage. Keeping the soil covered with crop residues. If you haven't done that in the past, if your soil is bare, I would challenge you just to keep a part of your garden covered and watch it throughout the summer. It will change quickly, very quickly. And then worms need things to eat. And that's where the cover crops come in, and especially the leguminous plants as well. They like those as well. So let's talk about ideal soil volume a little bit. We here on the left, we have an undisturbed a soil. We see that roughly half of it is solids there on the right half. And on the left half, we'd like to see half of it as air and half of it as water. Certainly, as we get too much water, it becomes saturated, and then we get an anaerobic condition, and that's not favorable. On the right is a compacted soil. Here we see the solids taking up most of the soil volume, and we have less room for air and water exchange. So back a few years, I worked with Dr. Sandeep Kumar. He was the lead researcher on several projects that I helped him with a little bit. And one of the neat things that he was doing is taking soil cores in clear plexiglass there on the left, and then he would send them to Missouri to be scanned by an X-ray scanner. And what we found out was he compared a conventional system in corn and beans to a no-till system that had a lot of those good soil health principles followed, and then to a native grass managed system. And what this is showing is that the green blotches are the pores. And we see an increase in pore space as we go from the conventional tillage to the no-till to the native grass. And so the native grass is the model. We're after that. That is the model for the very premier soil health. And so we're going after that. And then one thing I did is I took his scientific data, which he published, and I can't remember the journal's name, but I could find that out. But I took it and I tried to do my extension duty and write something that would have meaning to most people that aren't soil scientists. And so if you've had that soil experience at all, you've seen that pie chart that I previously showed, where the ideal soil is half solids and half voids. And I'm challenging that now with this summary. The conventional system really represents that textbook example. Our leading soil health examples here in the soil health system and in the native grass have a lot more voids, okay, than that textbook example. So here's the soil health system, and then you can see the native grass is actually almost 2/3 voids. 2/3 of the native grass soil profile is voids. And so we see how important that is, because when that rain comes, just last week, I think it was, we had 70 hundredths in like 20 minutes. And that comes that quickly. We want it to go in the ground, and it will in both of these systems. It really will. Okay. So the soil health system isn't there yet, but it's almost there. So you can see the trend from left to right as soil health improves. It's pretty alarming. So why is reducing tillage or no-till the first step? Because we want to maintain and allow that soil to build its strength. And at that same time, water infiltration improves, water erosion decreases, the air exchange improves. When water goes in the soil, air has to come out. And so if that can happen effectively, you can take a lot of rain as it comes in. The system doesn't plug like it would do in a rototilled system. In a rototilled system, it'll plug up. Doesn't seem like it can get the water in anymore. And that's happening in our tilled fields as well. So those crop residues remain on the soil surface. They provide that protection. Less carbon is released because of tillage. And our friend mycorrhizae fungi can increase with all the benefits that they bring. I'll discuss those in the future. But mycorrhizae fungi really exists in all soils. but the extent at which it's there functioning is a lot less when you do tillage. So they're very important for increased nutrient uptake. I'll show a slide here, the next one, that kind of shows what I mean there. They help the plants resist drought. They can fight other fungal diseases or bacterial problems with plants and even nematodes. They help soil structure and increase water holding capacity. Of course, they sequester carbon. And lastly, it's like an interstate highway system connecting a lot of different places. They're actually little pipes or roads or conduits for plants to really help each other out in a synergistic way. And I think of a program I watched about forestry in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest. They were studying nitrogen, and they had a couple fir trees, and they applied the marked, the labeled, the N15 to a branch high up in one fir tree, big fir tree. And they could use a Geiger counter to find it. So they validated it was there, and they came back in a certain amount of time, and they went to that branch and it had disappeared. And they looked all over and they looked all over, and finally they found it in a small little fir tree that was struggling by the big fir tree. That N15 had made its way over to that small tree. And in forest situations, there's a lot of mycorrhizal fungi. It's not disturbed, and forest soils are high in fungi, where tilled soils are low in fungi. And so we're trying to bring those back and help them come back. So we can see that it has that synergistic effect. So basically here in this diagram, you can see there I have a plant root here. And that plant root has a branch there, of course. And then around that plant root, we're looking at aggregates, and some are circles and some are oblong, but we know aggregates don't have that perfect shape, but for this case, we're showing that. And then the black little stringy things are the mycorrhizal fungal hyphae. And they actually form a little home here in the root. And the root allows them to do that because the benefits that the hyphae bring back to the root are greater than the root losing that space, right? So the plant is willing to exchange or to allow that to happen. Kind of like a legume forming a nodule on the root, the rhizobium bacteria. The plant is allowing that to happen. Because if there was enough nitrate in the soil, the plant wouldn't allow it to happen. But plants do signal things in the soil to happen. And that's a whole level of science that I'm probably never going to really understand. But here's that hyphae extending out into the soil matrix, like root hairs, and allowing more nutrients and even water to get to that root. So that's how important that mycorrhizal fungi is. There's a picture of it a little bit there blowing up by a good microscope. And we think about mycorrhizal effects. Here is a soybean plants, dry weight with and without fungi. You can see the effect of fungi. Slightly better copper uptake, a whole bunch more zinc uptake, and double phosphorus uptake when we have mycorrhizal fungi. Cover crops are very important. They provide all these benefits. These are my trophies. I'm not a hunter, but when I see a big radish or a big turnip, get kind of excited about that. That's kind of a neat thing that happens. So there's mine. Cover crops really replace the need to do anything that's related to tillage. They do it, and they do it better. So I'll go back to that soil health comparison again. You can see that difference. Maybe it's hitting more home for you now. Maybe you're thinking about it a little better. You can really see the aggregation on the right-hand side, and you can't on the left. In these two clods, you can see it. The one on the left has a lot of good structure, and the one on the right has none. Now I'm going to go through a series of agronomic pictures. Here we have corn growing with some good soil health principles. We have soybeans growing in those conditions, demonstrating good soil health. In fact, the picture on the left here, you can see the remnants of a cover crop there that are now dying away and allowing the soybeans to come. We can grow grass crops in these conditions as well. My point with showing the agronomic crops is that whatever the crop is, we can grow it in with those principles. So let's switch to gardens now a little bit. What really rocked my world over 10 years ago now was visiting a garden in North Dakota. It'd been no-tilled for 42 years and mulched during that time. They had taken that soil from 3.5 to 8.5% organic matter. You can see the rows there, and you can see the mulch in between the rows. But a bigger thing for me was witnessing the soil. And I'm standing there on the tour, and you don't want to mess around in this garden because it looks so perfect. And I was hoping he would dig a hole, and he did. And really, it was difficult to decide where the soil began when we were digging through that mulch. That's how many layers of decomposition there were. But obviously, he's holding it in his hand there, and it's as black as coal and full of carbon and life, and just a wonderful thing. Another garden here in Beetle County, using mulch there and no-till to plant. Another picture of the same garden. This guy here in Beetle County, he rotates with alfalfa. Half his garden is alfalfa. The other half is his garden. He goes back and forth, which is what he does. We're not saying everybody should do that. I think you have to learn these principles and apply them to your situation and how you like to do things. Maybe you have a very small space, and you don't do this type of thing, but you have cover crops, and you can put those in. Here's my first attempt at growing potatoes in no-till with the mulch there covering them up. Here's some onions growing, and I just made a slot with my spade and plant the sets in there and push the soil back in on them, and then put the hay down in this case, or straw, anything that you'd like. And here's the evidence. Those large onions can grow in no-till soil. They just can. So there's the proof. Here's probably the best attempt at us growing potatoes, no-till potatoes in our garden. I used straw that year, and you can kind of see the remnants of volunteer oats growing up. And, at first, I was inclined to go pull them out because you think, well, it's competing with the potatoes. But then I stepped back and I said, no, I'm going to let them grow. And, these potatoes never got a disease. They never had a problem. And one thing is important about oats. Oats and flax promote mycorrhizal fungi. They're naturally have a higher ability to do that in some other plants. And that's proven by the ARS, USDA, our Agricultural Research Service. So I let them grow. I was thinking I should have known that, but I just let them grow, and you see they matured, and now the potatoes are ready to go. And my wife doesn't know I share this picture, but there's our harvest. You just pull the straw or the hay back and the plant tops, and there are the potatoes. We kind of piled them a little bit different, so they were distributed more across that area. Don't get the impression they just grew right there, but they're just on top of the ground. And they're so super fun to harvest. You can see the wheelbarrow there is almost full as well. And so just a wonderful way to experience growing potatoes. Now, if you have a small garden, how do you do that in a small space? I have some ideas. I think it's very important to plan and track your rotation, and cover crops where they need to be planted, realizing you don't need a lot of seed to do that. And maybe some of you can share in that. I like to plant cereal grains Those will winter kill. And so the winter will kill them. If you plant like cereal rye or winter wheat, you'll have to crimp them down or use a chemical to kill them in the spring. But there's several innovative gardeners that have made hand crimpers that can crimp those down on the ground and then plant their crops. I rotate sweet corn and potatoes, right, wrong, or whatever. That's just what I do. It's worked. And then, as I mentioned, I had an oak companion crop. As far as cover crops, grass plants follow broadleaf plants and vice versa. So kind of think of that. It's not an absolute rule. I mean, you could have a mix of cover crops, but if it's predominantly grass, they can come before a broadleaf crop. If I was seeding grass cover crops, 8 to 12 seeds per square foot is plenty. Recognizing that most garden crops are broadleaves. So I think it's more important to get grass cover crops out there when you're done growing those broadleaves so that you can come back and grow those broadleaf crops again, because you see that kind of fits the bill as a rotation. So pest cycles are interrupted with these cover crops. And as soon as your garden, like the radishes are done, if you're not going to plant anything else there, get a cover crop growing there. I know those tomatoes hang on late in the fall. Just make a decision to plant some cover crops around them while you're waiting for those last fruits to mature and turn for you. Get something going in those gaps. And then in the future, I think more companion crops are really what we should think about. I think there's a lot of benefits there, and I think there's a huge open door for horticulture to really experience that and to go with that. And then if you need to use a clover, crimson is one that will winter kill better than most. So specifically, I mentioned I use a landscaping spade. It's a straight edged spade to cut straight rows in the soil, push it in, pry it over, push it in, pry it over, and to make a furrow that way, and to put either seeds or onion sets in there. For the potatoes, we just rake everything off to the side so that we have the soil exposed. And then we just very evenly place our potatoes on the soil surface, and we put that residue back on, and then we add hay and straw to that. The keys are not letting those potatoes dry out, right? You want to keep them moist. So it takes a while for that straw and hay to settle down. But once you got a good layer there that can keep those potato moist, then you don't need to water as much. And it's important to watch that throughout the growing season. You may need to add some more. Because one year we had potatoes get kind of green, the sun, I think the sun keeps them that way a little bit. And so you got to keep them in the dark, basically, is what you're trying to do. So, and, basically planting corn, a dowel, poke the dowel in, put the seed in, push the soil down. A lot of handwork, a knife or old knife or whatever. So I think most importantly is keep the soil firm around the seeds. So follow those soil health principles. There they are again. I won't go through them, but think about them. Think about them, how they apply to your garden plants, and just give it a try. And, in the future, maybe you'll try to put your tiller up for a sale. There's a lot of YouTube videos out there that a lot of people doing a lot of things. Potatoes in a gunny sack or something. They grow them vertically in there's many different ways to do those things. And so just get a little experimenting done and give it a try. And I think you'll like the results. So in summary, I mean, soil health is really vital. It may not be vital for next year or 10 years from now, but is vital for our free society to stay that way. A lot of wars and conflicts are fought over food and food scarcity and all those things. So think about that. We were given a great soil resource here in the upper Great Plains, and we need to take care of it. Soil health is created and maintained by following those principles. Soil health is vital for growing healthy food. Think of the food web in the soil, as I mentioned it, and how it fed upon itself during those through those different layers of consumers and providing energy back for the plants that are growing there. I think once you've visited a no-till garden, and I shouldn't just say no-till, once you've visited a soil health garden or tried it on your own, I don't think you'll go back to anything else. I think you'll just keep going and experimenting and learning, and it was really more enjoyable and relaxing than the other way. That's what I found. So with that, I've ran out of slides for today. So.
All right, thank you, Anthony. And for folks watching along, Anthony's contact information is up there on the screen. And if folks have any questions, we do have some time for questions, so feel free to throw those in the Q&A, and we'll keep an eye out there. And Robin has also posted, oh, we need to get that to everybody. Yeah, thanks, Matt. There is a link in the chat to a webinar survey. You can share some comments with us and let us know what you thought. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, we'll be back here again on Thursday with another edition of this series, and then again next Tuesday and Thursday. So this week we did soils today. We're going to be doing water resources on Thursday, and then next week is grasslands and biodiversity. So yeah. Robin, do you have any questions for Anthony?
Well, I don't have a question, but I actually had just gone and given a presentation about companion planting, and I'd found a book, and it's called Plant Partners. I don't have the author right now, but she had written about from research studies that showed that your method with planting potatoes and oats actually helps to prevent potato scab. So there's
Really?
something in the oats that actually are helping with the health of the potatoes as well. So I think that's
Just my dumb luck. That's good to know. Thank you, Robin.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's
I think
awesome.
there's a huge, I meant it when I said that. I think we're, there's probably old resources out there, but there's a lot we can discover yet by doing these companion crops. Even in broad acre agriculture, I think there's folks experimenting with them a lot. So,
yeah. Yeah, and I know I always like to mulch around my garden plants, either with grass clippings or straw, or a lot of times I'll put down cardboard and then wood mulch prior, like in the season prior to be planting, so that the cardboard kind of breaks down. And that's not necessarily in your like vegetable garden, but if I'm going to be planting like fruit trees or shrubs or things like that, it really helps. And then underneath that cardboard, if you dig it up and to plant, I mean, it's just rich and soft and it's full of worms. So I mean, a lot of what you are saying is I've found to be the case in my garden as well.
Yeah.
So
looks like we have a question in the chat. When adding compost or manure, do you leave it on the top or do you scratch it in?
Well, that's looking at the principles, we'd want to just leave it. You certainly don't want to apply it so heavily that it's really thick and impeding what you're doing there. Eventually, we have a lot of no-till farmers that surface apply manure and plant their crops. My neighbor did, applied cattle manure and planted his corn, and it's there for the soil, and it's a continual process. I mean, I saw in the chat you're doing it for 20 years. You've got that going now. So you probably can leave it alone and just keep, maybe add a little bit more every once in a while or and just keep the ground covered now and get a go at following those principles.
yeah, and I know that Dr. Rhoda Burrows has some information about compost and adding it in, the fall or prior to the winter or the manure, and that will just allow the kind of the winter, the snow and the water to kind of help incorporate that manure or compost into the soil over time without having to dig it in.
Right. And we did that in our garden just as well. I just thought of that. My son put on some manure and yeah, it just that was in the fall. He did that, and you're exactly right, Robin. Thank you.
So I know with like manure and compost that sometimes we have sources that have, carryover of various, either lawn care chemicals or agricultural chemicals. Anthony, what are some things that people should maybe look for if they're trying to source compost or manure for, say, like a vegetable garden where they plan on eating the produce?
Yeah, I'd be very I used to take a lot of those calls for someone. I think the education has got out there, but we have some weed control pesticides that can actually get into the grass, go through the cow, and get in the manure, and then the manure is applied to a vegetable garden, and the broadleaf plants just don't grow. And so yeah, the complete composting process should go a long ways in preventing that. And I guess I don't know the half-life in that process, Amanda. If you know, please fess up.
I was gonna say, I will say that if you're getting stuff, say your neighbor down the road, was a
Yeah,
livestock farmer, and he says, oh hey, definitely ask if they've treated,
right,
the pasture or anything, because some of those chemicals, if you look at the label, it will tell you sort of like either the grazing restriction or sort of the re-entry interval, and that'll give you an
right,
idea of how long that product is going to take to break down.
right.
Because yeah,
I would think any of the reputable compost, that sell compost,
mhm,
um, they should be aware of that. Should be,
yeah.
and you can test for those things too. So,
hmm
um, so yeah, I'd be aware of that.
Yeah, I know we've had some years with like some municipal compost sources having some like lawn care chemicals that then like burn a garden. So it's one thing to
Right.
be aware of and make sure you're sort of asking some of those questions, um,
Yeah,
so you
grass
don't
clippings
accidentally.
from your yard are fine, but if you right, I mean that's a good point. If you've applied crabgrass control,
hmm
that can get carried over in the grass clippings to the garden as well. Yep.
hmm
Hmm.
Mhm. Yeah, I do know we've had some inquiries about compost, municipal compost, and I reached out to the city of Sioux Falls, and they actually do test their compost um, for any chemicals like herbicides and things like that.
Oh, that's good.
And and the guy said that it was usually always at very minimal or not even detectable levels. So that
Mhm.
is good to know. And usually, like you said, that composting process will degrade a lot of those things. And I do know for food safety purposes, if you're using manure, you want to make sure that that's aged at least 6 months and not necessarily 6 months over the winter, like fresh manure that's over
Mhm.
the winter, because that's really too cold to really allow it to degrade. So well
Yeah,
rotted and aged manure over 6 months is important for putting on the garden.
sure. Yep.
Yeah.
And especially like I recommended on the surface.
Mhm.
And you're growing any,
Mhm.
yeah, yep. You got to be careful with that one. Mhm.
Yep. Well, very cool. Thank you so much, Anthony. Thank you, Robin, for being our co-host here. We will be seeing everybody again, hopefully on Thursday. And in the meantime, you can check out the recordings and all the other information on the SDSU Extension YouTube channel. And I'll be back online tonight for Garden Hour at 7 p.m. So I'm sure I'll see some familiar names there as well.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you,
Yep.
Anthony.
Thanks,
Yep.
everybody.
Yep.
Have a great day.
Yep. You too.
Yep. Bye bye.